Welcome, and thank you for joining CBTS Tech Talk. Inside the CISO's office, I'm the producer, Lance Hart. I'm excited as we have a special guest in the studio with us today. I am joined by John Brueggemann. He is our consulting CISO here at CBTS. And we are also joined by retired CISO from Kroger, Brian Lawhorn. Welcome, guys. John, before we jump right in, like I always say,
yes,
I have a quick public service announcement to make. It is pronounced Kroger, not Kroger's, not Krogs, not Kroger. Now, John, we can jump right in.
Thanks, Lance. I appreciate it. Brian, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. I like to jump right into it and get into the sort of meat and potatoes of what you've been able to do there at Kroger. So when you think back over your career, what would you say was one of your bigger challenges or biggest challenge as a CISO for a large retail organization?
Well, thanks. I'm proud to be here. One of the things that we challenged ourselves with was we were a new organization when I got there 21 years ago. Security wasn't a thing back then. Subsequently, we had a huge company that we had to move the needle. So it was very difficult getting the entire organization on board and prepared for this journey that we were about to take.
So did you have to, there was not a culture of security, I'm guessing, at Kroger in the context of computers? There probably was one for what we hear in the industry, loss prevention.
Oh, very much so.
So did you leverage the loss prevention culture to sort of piggyback onto that to get computer security culture or information security culture?
Maybe I should have, but I didn't.
Okay.
It was really just getting the organization to move the needle on, this is going to be important going forward. As an example, we have a philosophy of merging with other organizations. We have 17 different banners. And when we would merge with them, there would be a Charlie Brown at Smith's.
Okay.
But there was already a Charlie Brown at
Kroger.
Wherever.
Yeah.
And we wound up with, C Brown 1, C Brown 2, C Brown 3.
Oh, so just the name.
Just the naming conventions of folks.
Okay.
And all of the different identity and access needed.
Oh, sure. That would be a big challenge for anybody.
It was impossible. And what brought it to the head was there was a C Brown as a president that wanted to be C Brown 1.
Okay.
Not C Brown 23.
Yeah.
So we had to fix that.
Okay.
And that required an enormous amount of energy to change
identities
for everyone.
Right, because you would have, I did it in my previous career where we had a naming convention for users, which worked fairly well. Mm-hmm. A first initial, full last name. Pretty straightforward. People could remember it, but we didn't run into that problem as quickly as I think you would have run into that problem. So what did you end up doing for that Charlie Brown that wanted to be Charlie Brown number 1?
Well, fortunately, I had one of the smartest young men on my team who went home and wrote a code for identity and access creation. So we thought using a standard convention gives a bad actor some percentage of advantage. So we didn't want them to know the identity of the user, let alone the password, obviously, but the user ID should be part of the equation. So we made a convention where you would have, a set of characters, both numeric and alpha, and that was your identity.
So it wasn't Charlie Brown. It became like CB and then the last 3 digits of their ID or something. I'm not saying that's what it was.
Something like that, but that is exactly what we did. So everyone had a unique ID. There was no question whether or not that was you. And if you chose to share that ID and there was problems, not only would you be in trouble, but so would the individual that was using it.
Well, and that would probably be pretty easy to track since it was unique IDs for everybody. Yeah,
exactly.
So when you started 21 years ago, roughly, you had to build out the entire program. Mm-hmm. And did you have a given budget, or did you have to justify everything from the get-go, or how was that determined?
Well, I think I walked into an enormous effort to get things going. I asked for money on an as-needed basis.
Okay.
I met with the audit committee and the full board multiple times a year.
Oh,
and it was
that early on.
Well, I started in August of 2020, and obviously in September of that same year, there was a problem in New York.
2000. You started in September
2000. Where's the time go?
Yes.
In 2000. And so we basically got kind of a pass, fix whatever needs to be fixed in the priority it needs to be fixed in. And so we went about it in a very simplistic way. We don't know who's who, so we got to fix that.
One of the first controls in any security framework, you have to have identity management, you have to have, physical asset inventory and software inventory.
Well, that's exactly right. So we went on that journey, and when we needed money, I asked for it and I got it.
And you got to the board that quickly, so to speak, in the sense.
Yeah, I'd love to tell the story.
Okay.
So I started in August, and in late September, we had a board meeting.
Okay.
And our CIO at the time asked me to pull together a presentation and present it to him. So I did, and he said, "No, we have 30 minutes." And
That's a good chunk of time.
He had me go through the presentation, and I was well within that time, allowed for questions. So I go to the board meeting, and it was packed, and it was really hot in there.
Oh, no.
And the president of the company was sitting behind me because it was too many people at the table. And it was kind of, what's the right word? Intimidating.
Oh, sure. New kid on the block, suddenly sitting in front of a huge board, packed room.
Well, the audit committee chair was the former Treasury Secretary of the United States.
There you go.
So, and I was told under no uncertain terms that if I went over, she would use the umbrella and hook you right off.
Okay.
So I started my first page. I couldn't get through it. Everybody was pummeling me with questions.
Oh, my.
And I'm like, oh, my gosh. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm never going to get to the end of this. So fast forward, and we reach the 30-minute mark. I'm not done. She interrupts. I'm waiting for the rope. And she said, "Brian, this is a really important topic, and I think it warrants more time."
Ooh.
And the CIO is sitting next to me, and I thought he was going to faint because that just never happened. So I proceeded to finish, and then she managed to throw in the final question, "Tell me a little bit about yourself." Now, I'm in this room of spectacular people, and they're wanting to know about me. And I'm like, oof, what do you tell them?
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm your CISO.
So I stood up, left. The chairman at the time walked me out, and he goes, "That's never happened."
Whoa.
He goes, "You're a keeper." So I felt right at home.
That gives you a nice warm and fuzzy when that happens on your first board meeting.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
When you wanted to add talent to your team, what was your method for acquiring talent? Did you hit the high-profile schools, or did you recruit internally? What was your strategy for that?
Well, my secret sauce was to find really good talent, people that were committed to learning, people that had the ability to grasp these concepts, people that could think outside the box. And I went looking for them both within Kroger and outside of Kroger, and we had a great intern program at the time. So every year we, refilled, and if someone was a match, we kept them. My deputy CISO was an intern. The gentleman that I spoke to about the identity and access, he was an intern. So, and they're still there. So it really was about finding talent,
and not through an exam. It's not like you put people through an exam, but they came in perhaps as an intern, or you quizzed them on topics, or?
So definitely not college grade talent.
Okay.
If I found someone that had skills, it was irrespective of whether or not they had
A degree.
a degree.
Okay.
What I wanted and what I needed was someone that could absorb like a sponge, respect this process. You can't send someone to a college and try to figure out the complications of a retail organization that also manufactures, that also sells fuel, that also sells candy
And jewelry.
and pharmacies, and it's just not something that they're going to teach you.
Right. Yeah. And so it sounds like your tool for finding talent was growing. I mean, you wanted to get somebody young, so the internship program could be good, and it doesn't sound like you required that they come from college.
Well, in fairness to the young comment, my first hire was a former coworker of mine at Champion Paper, and he was 20 years my senior.
Oh.
So it wasn't
It's a relative term.
It wasn't about age.
Okay.
It was about talent
Okay.
and the capabilities to work in a very difficult environment.
Because that's one thing that you and I talked about before, was that the margins in the retail are pretty slim.
1.7 cents on the dollar
Is the margin,
is the margin.
which is a tiny, tiny margin.
So you have to sell billions and billions to pay people
Right.
to have these facilities. You know, grocery is not going to make you a Bill Gates.
Interesting.
It's just not.
But one of the things maybe you liked about retail was the dynamic nature of it.
I fully expected to go for a year, maybe two,
Okay.
and then, pop out and have that on my resume. And it captures your senses. I mean, the people there were so good.
Okay.
The talent was among the best I've ever been. And I had consulted for years.
With a larger company.
I just was shocked at how talented people were.
And it's fun to work with talented people.
Not only is it fun, it's easier.
Oh, well, there is that. That's a very fair point. That's a very fair point.
So seeing that talent and watching people, appreciate what we're doing for a large company meant a lot to me. And I wanted to hang my hat there and say, look, I did this.
And look what we built. I mean, 'cause
Exactly.
20 years is a generation of time, and that's you get an opportunity to put your mark on an organization with that kind of tenure.
Well, no disrespect, but it was 21.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that the folks know that, this was not my plan, was to stay forever.
Okay.
And the average tenure of a CISO, last I checked, was like 2.5 years.
Correct. I think it doesn't make it to 3. Yeah.
It doesn't make it to 3. So I figured, a couple years, see what I got, check out, find out another place. But it was my home.
21 years is a really long time. And did anybody try to court you away from Kroger?
Yes.
Okay.
I
I figured you had opportunities.
I was actually offered 3 times my salary, and I told them no.
Wow. That's impressive. And that's because of the people or the
Exactly.
culture. Or,
When you build a team and you sweat and toil with them for 10, 12 hours a day, and you see what you're completing and the mark you're making on a large corporation, it mattered to me.
yeah.
Maybe it's the same reason I stayed married for 37 years. I don't know, but I'm kind of loyal.
Yeah. Well,
And they got me.
and Kroger's treated you well too, or well enough.
I retired.
Yes. So that's a good sign. Let's stick with the general concerns that have probably the attention of every CISO at this point in time with government regulations. So we've had CISOs on before that have had, a whole host of compliance regulations. What were some of the regulations that you faced, and what did you find as a bigger challenge?
Well, just to give the younger folks out there some kind of context, PCI didn't exist when I started at Kroger.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention that, but I'm glad you did.
I had hair when I started at Kroger. I was actually good looking. It just fell apart.
Brian, I understand about the hair thing. I got you. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No worries. But PCI was the first kind of regulatory a stamp that we had to put on our company.
And it's not even government related.
It's not government
It's industry.
related, but it still required a large effort to be compliant, stay compliant, manage those assets responsibly.
Right.
So that was job one. Then, pharmacies with the HIPAA.
Oof.
We
Yes.
have millions and millions of customers.
Yep.
And that required, a lot of...
Securing medical information is very important.
Correct. Stand back and say, well, how many employees do Kroger have?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well,
I know you may know.
I do know, but I would have guessed, like, I think of the Walmarts, because you do compete with a big Walmart, the Walmart industry, if you will. I would have guessed, prior to you letting me know what the number is, 200,000 employees, because you're big. I don't know the entire footprint of Kroger, but go ahead and tell us how large of an organization Kroger
Nearly
is.
500,000 actual associates.
Yeah.
That does not count the 250,000 contractors, vendors, business partners that we do business with from a computer standpoint.
From an integration of third party.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's a large number. Probably some people assume, not that you have to talk about budget, but some people would assume with a multi-billion-dollar company, Fortune 17 was what you had said, that you've got a budget of, I'm going to make up a number, $100 million, which probably is not true. I made up a number. I recognize retail is competitive and that you do a lot with a little. So talk a little bit about the tools. If you want, you don't have to give names or anything like that, but how are you able to be so successful with the tight budgets that are in the retail space? Right.
So I think there's kind of a two-pronged approach. Obviously, you want best of breed or best of product, if affordable. If not, what else can you do? Well, you can find those startups. You can hunt down those folks in Israel and the United States that are writing code that's going to be a product of the future.
Right.
But you got to get them early, because if you don't get them early, you're going to be paying the same as everybody else. But if you give them early, then you have a chance to become their,
a named client of them.
Exactly.
So they can put you on their sort of NASCAR.
Look who we have as a customer, and they're quite happy. You want to talk to them, and we'd be happy to do that.
So you would sort of work with up-and-coming companies and leverage the size of Kroger and be willing to be a reference for that vendor to get an affordable price for the size of an organization that you are.
Correct.
Okay.
Another example is if it's too expensive, write your own.
Well, yes.
So we did plenty of that in our day.
So did you have a development team inside of your security team? I'm sure there's a development team inside of Kroger. I mean, there's no doubt in mine. Or did you? So you utilized some of that talent, or did you have your own programmers on staff?
Initially, we used folks from the application development team, from some other departments, and picked and prodded until we found the folks we needed. At a point in our career, we actually hired on a development team that worked both in India and the United States, so that we could keep the code going 24/7.
Interesting. And that's really, for the size of your organization, it makes sense. Like you said, if you couldn't afford it, then build it yourself, because you could define the requirements. And if you give a programmer clearly defined requirements, they can frequently code to those requirements successfully.
Correct.
So defining the problem is sometimes half the problem. We're going to ask the other question about what you liked most about your role as a CISO.
It's a lot harder to answer than what I like least, but
okay. Well, you can give me that too. I like compare and contrast. Some people are like, oh, you sit in the corner office, you've got the glass walls, and for some people, they might think that when you're in the CISO's office, all you do is write reports and talk to the board. Some people think that all you do is you look at 5 screens because you're trying to do incident response on the fly.
Okay.
So help people understand a little bit what the real CISO's office is like.
At least for a large organization like ours, I spent a lot of time managing teams.
Yeah.
Working with the people individually, making sure that work-life balance is there, making sure that their
There's
families
a work-life balance, and
believe it or not, it can
properly done.
It can get hard if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And we were a very small staff, so we had to do a lot of things, outside hours, and
Yeah.
So I had one individual come to me because I always had one-on-ones with everybody on the team, and he's
On more than an annual basis.
oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
quarterly.
yes.
Okay.
And my assistant would set it up. They'd come in. If they didn't have anything to talk about, then
It was a short meeting.
And one of them said, I'm burning out. I'm working all day. I'm going home. I'm getting paged. I'm getting called out. It's just not working.
Right.
I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'll find an organization in another part of the world that will support us off hours.
Oh.
You train them, you get them up to speed, and your calls will go down to emergencies only.
He becomes the tier 3 response.
He becomes, call when glass needs broke.
Yeah.
And it worked out marvelously. He just, couldn't thank me enough. Who's this guy listening? That doesn't happen. And so we did something about it.
Yeah, and you leverage, not that other folks can't leverage, the around the clock sort of model. That's a very good takeaway for people is to think, if you've got good talent that you want to keep and they're getting burned out, which can very easily happen, then you can leverage other resources. I mean, obviously you have to have somebody in your pool to move in that direction. And that's something that will help keep your team sane and keep them from getting burned out. That's
Exactly.
great. That's great to hear.
Yeah. And had I not had that conversation, I could only venture to guess that the conversation would have been, Brian, I'm leaving.
Right. I got bad news for you.
And now I've got a multitude of problems.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of this intellectual property leaving. I got to replace that person, and that person's not going to be cheap. And more than likely, I'm going to pay more, and it's going to cost me more.
And there's going to be a ramp-up time. And
there's many reasons why you want to keep your teams happy, engaged, trust in their leaders. There's all kind of reasons for this.
Yeah, and the quarterly touch point seems a reasonable time frame for a touch point. Not too frequent, not so rare that somebody's forgotten what happened last quarter.
And you know what? 15 minutes in my day, and I could do,
Four in
an hour,
Yeah.
and it was well worth the time spent.
Yeah, that's a very good takeaway. As you think about, we've talked about talent, we've talked about government regulation. When you look at and you might be able to look at it with a different set of eyes now that you've retired, what do you see as emerging threats that, somebody who's watching this and is thinking about, okay, it's 2023, we've got ransomware as an issue, we've got, third-party risk as an issue, we've got artificial intelligence that can be used to write really convincing phishing emails. Are there those topics plus others, or what would you say are some of the emerging threats?
Well, certainly the ones you described are still here and aren't going away.
Unfortunately.
I used to be on a Microsoft board for their security profile.
Okay.
And it was a bunch of large companies, Boeing and the like. And Satya, when he came on board, he came in and spoke to us.
That would be the president or CEO of Microsoft.
Correct. And Satya said, we will never write perfect code.
True statement.
And it wasn't an alarming statement. It's something we all knew.
I say, anybody's in the business.
But to hear it from the CEO saying, there is never going to be a product that goes out that is perfect.
Right.
And will stay perfect.
Right, and has no vulnerabilities.
Using that as your backdrop, we're going to have a job forever.
Yes.
And the problems are going to be magnified if we don't continue to work harder on this space. And I think, the bad guys know this. And the bad guys have more money, more resources, and more willpower.
And or time.
Well, if you sit on your couch, you have no transportation costs.
That's correct.
So the challenge is you've got a really tough team that you are a massive underdog because you're not allowed to play offense.
Correct.
You can only play defense. And they only have to be right once, and you have to be right every day.
Yeah. It's good to set the table appropriately, like you said, to have the CEO of Microsoft say in a meeting of advisors, look, we write software. We're not going to write perfect software. Let's come to an understanding about that and don't expect the product to be delivered perfectly.
It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody listening to this. Every product that we have is going to have features, we call them,
Yes.
that are weaknesses.
Yeah.
And those are the challenges you have to face every day.
And did you find that nothing surprised you as far as the vulnerabilities that you had to mitigate the control? I mean, the control, you might have aligned yourself to NIST cybersecurity framework. You might have aligned to ISO. Probably wouldn't have had to do ISO. But did you find that aligning to a framework helped you mitigate existing risk and emerging risks?
I'm going to date myself because this is a funny story. When I walked into Kroger, obviously there was no framework. And I pulled out my British Standard 7799.
Okay.
You probably don't even know it.
That one is. I do not know.
It is the precursor to the current standards.
Okay.
And I said, this is what we're going to do.
Okay.
These are the things we're going to work on first. These are the things we want to get to, but we want to follow this framework.
So you started with a framework.
Literally, I had
in the year 2000. So everybody
paper,
listening,
in paper,
a paper version of a framework.
And so that's how we got started.
Okay. So and then as the years went on, so I don't know when NIST cybersecurity framework came out, but I'm going to guess it was in the late 2000s.
Well, I said I started in 2020, so don't tell me
2000.
2000.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay. The framework, I mean, definitely helped you establish your priorities.
It was not an enormous surprise to us that they were going to upgrade the framework and make it a little more glossy and add a few words to it. But the bottom line is the British Standard 7799 and the NIST framework are almost identical.
Huh. So was third-party risk a component that you thought about in 2000, 2001 when you started?
I wouldn't say I thought about it first.
No, right.
But certainly we had thousands of vendors that we had to support and support us.
Okay.
So yes, it was a concern, still is a concern, and probably our biggest pain point during the pandemic.
Really? Why was it most accentuated during the pandemic?
I guess the bad actors had more time to spend on
attacking
third parties.
I mean, we saw an increase in third party. I mean, SolarWinds, things like that were definitely targeted.
You name it, and it seemed like, and I'm flippant here, but every other month we were dealing with someone else's problem, and because they were instrumental to our business, we felt compelled and, quite frankly, needed to help them through their issues.
So
I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
There was a company that sold all of the frozen foods in the United States.
Wow.
And
one company?
Their market share is quite high.
Okay.
So you name a grocery store and they are supplying them with frozen foods.
Okay.
Massive problem. We could have lost our Thanksgiving. And for you that aren't aware, that's like our Super Bowl.
Okay.
If they weren't back online.
So they got hit with like a ransomware attack.
It was a problem.
Okay.
A problem,
we'll be discreet.
A problem of consequence. And they weren't able to use their computers.
Wow.
And so we had to help them get back online, operationalize their systems so that we can get our supplies delivered to our stores.
So there was an attack called NotPetya back in 2017 where Ukraine, there was a supplier of accounting software in Ukraine that ended up hitting Maersk and some other international companies.
Correct.
I don't think Kroger's was impacted, but that sounds like a similar situation because Maersk was completely offline. They didn't, in a sense, know where their ships were. They didn't know what trucks should be going to what ports to pick up what merchandise. And they went to some of their suppliers to say, we need help or you're not going to get what you think you're going to get.
Exactly.
So you did that same thing, and that's not going to make most news reports.
No.
Understandable. I mean, but I'm going to guess now, based on that statement, that you might have done that more than once.
That would be correct.
So that again is something that I think most CISOs might not think about off of the top of their head, is to have alignments with their suppliers. I mean, if you're a huge player like Kroger is, that you might have more resources than a very necessary supplier, and it's in both of your interests for that supplier to be successful at the end of the day.
Certainly your tier one suppliers, the ones that are critical to your business, there's no doubt that you have to keep an eye on that. But if you have thousands and thousands of companies, you can't necessarily say, on this day, they're important. On this day, they're not as important.
Right.
We have to have these operationals working every day.
That's one of the things in my role as a consulting CISO. I help companies go through a cybersecurity framework, whether it's NIST or ISO or CIS controls, to help them start to think about risk and think about ways of protecting their business. And one of the things that I've asked now at least half a dozen companies over the last 12 months, do you know who your critical suppliers are? Unfortunately, nobody, with rare exception, has been able to say, oh yeah, our top 5 critical suppliers are these 5 companies. Everybody should start thinking that way and have an understanding, if they're critical to your business now, how do you make sure that they're still in business so that you're still in business?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's key. Our final question, I noticed you've got a pin from the United States Marines. How did that shape or inform your career?
I was in the infantry, so I was technically a rifleman.
Okay.
So to say that was a stepping stone to my current or my career is a stretch.
Okay.
But what I will say is the discipline and the respect to work and teamwork and all of that ancillary learnings that you get from a military background helped me become who I am.
Do you try to recruit former military or have you found that the 2-year, 4-year career that some folks will get if they do a short enlistment, some people will sign up for 2 years or 4 years, has that helped shape them typically? Has that been your experience?
I have or had several Marines on my team, and it is not a favorable, it's not supposed to be favorable, but how can I help not looking at someone that has gone through what I had gone through and say, that's someone I'd like to work with. The military does bring, a lot of goodness and talent.
At a minimum, structure. And some people, particularly, I know when I was 18 years old and graduating from high school, I knew I was going to college, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And Israel, I know for sure, and a number of other countries have as a mandatory years of service.
Correct.
Actually, I just heard about South Korea. They also have mandatory years of service, or at least 12 months or something, but just 1 year. So you found that formation period to be pretty helpful.
Again, not for everyone, but it certainly helped me.
Okay. Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
All right. I appreciate your time here, Brian. Lance, I'll throw it back to you.
Brian, I admire your loyalty to your team. I love CBTS, but if someone offered me 3 times my salary, I might be out. So I really admire you for having that loyalty to your team. I also love how you weren't concerned about new talent having a degree. That mindset, work ethic, passion, and just the passion to learn and grow far outweighs the importance of a degree. I couldn't agree more, and it resonated with me very much. Lastly, I would like to go ahead and say that it's very apparent that you're passionate about what you've done over your career. Charles Dickens said, "A loving heart is the truest wisdom," and I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you very much. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds great.